The conclusions I made from the graphs was that having poor mental health doesn't have a strong correlation with diabetes. Obesity has a strong correlation with the cause of diabetes. Poor mental health can allow bad diet and cause obesity, and obesity can make you unhappy about yourself and cause poor mental health. So although my dependent variable was diabetes, my two independent variables were obesity and mental health, and after looking at all of the data, I found that my two independent variables created a cause and effect with one another. Poor mental health has a stronger correlation to obesity than it does to the cause of diabetes. So another conclusion I made when looking at the data set was when looking at the obesity and mental health rate comparison chart and removing any outliers, the slope shifts from 0.59 to 2.8 when the outliers are removed. So here is another example of my comparison chart. So I compared each variable with one another. So here we can kind of see that obesity and mental health have a pretty strong correlation, whereas obesity or diabetes and mental health do not really have a correlation at all, and obesity and diabetes also have a pretty good correlation. So the overall impact, so obesity has a really strong overall impact on diabetes because when you are obese, you begin to store glucose as fat, thus making your glucose levels too high. High glucose levels need the help of insulin to decrease them to a normal blood glucose sugar level. If you are prescribed with insulin to control your blood sugar levels, you are considered a diabetic. In the graph that compares diabetes and obesity, we can see that when the obesity rate increases, the diabetes rate spikes as well. Using the data on the comparison, on comparing mental health and diabetes, the graphs do not indicate a correlation between two variables. In other words, mental health rate and diabetes rates do not affect one another. So the peer feedback I received was from Anna Weiss, and she just suggested that I talk about the actual provinces rather than saying from west to east, and also talking about the slope when I'm making a conclusion. So my response to feedback was originally I used the term east to west to describe the data, but then from the feedback I changed the wording to use actual provinces to describe the conclusions about the graph. Also, I had a conclusion which corresponds to the slope and the changes in the slope when I removed the outliers. The feedback helped me build on my conclusions and make sure I explained every variable effectively. So areas for improvement. So I thought that if I had more time, I would be able to look at multiple sets of data from other sources to ensure that my conclusions are accurate. And also, I could have looked at more causes of the variables. For example, I could have looked at the support systems for mental health or what resources were available to the different provinces, which could have had an effect on the data. I am still curious about other causes of diabetes and how it changes between provinces, and I would have liked to have time to further research other variables. Depending on how the data was collected, especially for mental health, if it was an unbiased study, then they may have been more prone to denying their poor mental health. So this would have been a bias flaw within the data collection. So through my prior knowledge of human anatomy and how glucose levels fluctuate when you are diabetic, I am quite confident with the conclusions I made, not only because of the logic and reasoning, but also because of biological and mental health facts. And that is the end of my presentation.